All right, so a little bit awkward way I ended the last lecture. I apologize. Anyways, so actually, I'll just go back to it. So we talked about failed attempt at reform, that there was a struggle within the Ottoman Empire, um, and also difficulty in controlling some of the minority groups within the Ottoman Empire. Um, so there was a defeat by Russia in southeastern Europe, about 1812. The Greeks were rebelling against the Sultan in 1821, and with the help from the Russians, they were able to fight off the Ottoman Empire. Now, here's what's really significant. Um, I have a friend that I went to high school with. He is Greek, of Greek ancestry, and he was meeting. He was made friends with some Turkish guys, and he went to the house, and the family asked for his last name, and he has an American accent. He just doesn't. And his name is Adam. That could be any ethnicity. They found out he was Greek, and they were from Crete, by the way, which is there's still a little tensions between Turks and Greeks. And it was like they said, "You're out of here. Get out of the house." And he has some Greek relatives that feel the same about Turks. So there's this really long held. There's still a lot of animosity and tensions between Greeks and Turks going back to these time periods. There's also, keep in mind that the Greek Orthodox Church, which is really the old, Eastern Roman Church, is in communion with the Russian Orthodox. And so there is a kind of solidarity, I guess you could say, with the Russian Orthodox Church and the Greeks. And the Russian, Tsarist Russia often would, under the pretext of helping fellow Christians that they're in communion with, would use that as a way to try to get a foothold into Ottoman territories. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay, now, going back to the Ottoman Empire and its reform. So 1826, major military reorganization. And then Mahmud declares war on the Janissaries, massacring thousands. Think about it like Return of the Jedi, or, in Star Wars, the idea that the Empire went out to destroy all the Jedis. This illustration was brought to me by a grad student when I was doing undergraduate work at UC Santa Cruz, and I thought, I got to mention that. That's kind of interesting. So here were these elite slave forces that were then seen as kind of maybe feudalistic, or they didn't fit into a modernized military, and then they wanted to rebel, and so then the Ottoman rulers were just like, well, we're just going to get rid of them all, massacre them. Then they formed a Western-style army, asserted state control over law and education, and they did this at the expense of the ulama. The ulama would be the Islamic clerics, okay? In other words, a secular state started to emerge, the non-religious sector of society, okay? And so now I move into the important one, which is for your post and what we see in the reading, the Tanzimat reforms. So Mahmud's successors followed with this reorganization, okay, from 1839 to 1876. Established regional representative assemblies, secular school system, meaning education outside of religion, more equitable tax structure, breaking away from that feudalistic way, laws partly modeled on the Napoleonic Code, and even equal rights for non-Muslims, which would become problematic. Keep in mind that while the Islamic rule was better to minorities than often Christian kingdoms were, it was still officially hierarchical. In other words, if you were Jewish or Christian, you had to pay a certain tax. And you were a dhimmi people, you were considered protected with certain rights in a subjugated form, which, even if that was progressive under compared to the old imperial old empires, that just doesn't fly in modern like a modern nation state, at least in name, right? So there was in theory, very limited enhancement for women, though. Okay, but this was significant, and you see this the stamp here I just put up because I wanted you to see that it's important to Turkey to this day. Okay, we're going to move on here. And so the Sultan doesn't like this. So in 1876, proclamation of liberal constitution by Sultan. A year later, opening of Turkish parliament, meaning more democracy. He didn't like this and he wanted to reassert his authority. So he shut down the parliament, suspended the constitution, and repressed with the secret police. Okay? And what happens? Several things. The Crimean War of 1854 and 1856, very significant. By the way, this is interesting. Russia gets attacks the Ottoman Empire in the name of solidarity, also with their Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire. Britain and France don't like this because it strengthens the position of Russia, so they side with the Ottoman Empire in the Crimean War. And so this is where I go back to this whole idea about clash of civilizations, Islam versus the West. Here was an Islamic nation being attacked by a Christian nation, and the Christians siding with a Muslim nation because they didn't want the other Christian nation to have too much power, meaning Christianity and Islam, it's not the real issue, right? Okay, so take a look at that if you're interested in just thinking about the way politics really break down to. So defeated again by Russia, losing more lands though. Okay, regardless, some liberal nationalist Turkish college students actually plotted against the Sultan, and they failed and fled to Paris, but they collaborated with other army officers from the Ottoman Empire. Abdul Hamid was forced to restore the constitution and parliament, and next year replaced him by his brother, and the Young Turks mainly led the empire. This is all very complex. I realize you're probably kind of just getting a little bit lost on this. Take a look at the reading. What's significant, again, though, I want you to think about Japan and the Meiji Restoration. I want you to think about how these empires that watched the West rise up then were trying to reformulate, going by Western ways to kind of keep up with what was going on in the world in terms of power, and the way the shift of the way that Western culture really affected all these various cultures and how they reacted. Okay, and so actually we're going to stop there, and then we're going to move on to Egypt after this. But again, I want you to ideally look through and read more in your book on the Tanzimat, and then anyways, we're going to go on to Egypt next. So yeah.